The cabin sat like a clenched fist against the mountain, weathered gray wood barely distinguishable from the rock and ice surrounding it. Smoke leaked from a crooked chimney pipe, the only sign that something living existed inside. Gideon Hale hadn't seen another human being in 4 months. He preferred it that way. He was splitting wood when he heard the truck. The sound came from nowhere, a growling engine climbing the fire road that shouldn't have been passable this time of year. Gideon stopped mid-swing, the axe frozen above his shoulder, his breath clouded in the March air. The temperature had dropped again overnight, 12 degrees at dawn. Snow still covered everything in a suffocating blanket of white. The truck appeared through the pines like an apparition. A Ford F250, dark blue, pushing through snow that should have stopped it a mile back. Gideon lowered the axe slowly, his jaw tightening. Nobody came up here, not in winter, not ever, if they had any sense. He watched the truck navigate the last 100 yards, engine whining, tires spinning and catching. When it finally stopped 30 feet from his cabin, Gideon didn't move. He stood there with the axe in his hands, waiting. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, late 50s, thick through the middle, wearing a Carhartt jacket that looked expensive and clean. Not a man who spent time in the wilderness. He surveyed the cabin, the woodpile, and finally Gideon himself with the kind of dismissive assessment city people gave to things they didn't understand. "You Hale?" the man called out. Gideon didn't answer. The man seemed to take that as confirmation. He walked around to the passenger side, boots crunching in the frozen snow. When he opened that door, Gideon saw her. A young woman, maybe 22 or 23, slid out awkwardly, one hand braced against her swollen belly. She was pregnant, visibly, heavily pregnant. She wore a thin jacket that wouldn't keep anyone warm past October, jeans that looked damp at the knees, and canvas sneakers that were already soaked through. Her dark hair hung in tangles around a pale, exhausted face. She looked at Gideon once, then looked away. The older man grabbed a duffel bag from the back seat and dropped it in the snow at her feet. "Get your things." "Dad." Her voice was quiet, almost swallowed by the wind. "I said get your things." She bent awkwardly to retrieve the bag, struggling with the weight and her balance. The man didn't help her. He turned back to Gideon instead. "You take in strays, right? That's what Jenkins told me." Gideon's grip tightened on the axe handle. "Jenkins talks too much. He said you might help, for the right price." The man pulled out a wallet, thumbed through bills. "I got 3,000 here, cash." "I don't want your money." The man stopped counting. "Everyone wants money. Not me." They stood there in the cold, measuring each other. The young woman hugged herself, shivering. She looked like she might collapse. "Look," the man said, his voice dropping into something that might have been meant to sound reasonable. "I can't take her back. Her mother won't have her in the house. Not like this. Not after what she did." "What she did?" Gideon repeated flatly. "She got herself in trouble, made her bed. Now she's got a lie in it." He gestured at the cabin. "You got space up here. She can work. She's not useless. Just needs somewhere to stay until she figures things out." "Figures what out?" The man's face hardened. "That's not my problem anymore." Gideon looked at the young woman again. She was staring at the ground now, arms wrapped tight around herself, shaking from more than just the cold. Her lips had a bluish tint. She wouldn't last 2 hours out here dressed like that. "You're her father," Gideon said. "I'm done being her father." The man shoved the bills back in his wallet, then pulled out a smaller stack and held it out. 500, that's my final offer. "Keep your money." "Then what do you want?" Gideon looked at the cabin, then back at the woman. Something twisted in his chest, something he'd tried to bury for 3 years. "Leave her the truck." The man laughed. "The hell I will. You drove her up here to die. Least you can do is leave her a way down." "She's not going to die." "You're here, aren't you?" "I didn't agree to anything." They locked eyes. The wind picked up, howling through the pines. The young woman swayed on her feet. Finally, the man shook his head. "You're crazier than Jenkins said." He turned to the woman. "Lena, you listening to me?" She nodded without looking up. "This is on you. You understand that? You made this choice, not me, not your mother. You." "I know," she whispered. "Don't call, don't write, don't show up at the house. You're not welcome there anymore. Okay. He stood there a moment longer, like he was waiting for her to fight back, to cry, to beg. When she didn't, something flickered across his face, maybe regret, maybe just irritation. Then he turned and walked back to the truck without another word. The engine roared to life, gears ground. The truck backed up in a wide arc, tires spitting snow, then headed down the fire road the way it came. Within minutes, the sound faded completely. Silence rushed back in. Gideon and Lena stood 20 feet apart, not looking at each other. She was still shivering. Her sneakers were soaked through, her jeans wet to the knees. She'd be hypothermic soon. You got other clothes in that bag? Gideon asked. She nodded. Anything warm? A pause. Some. Get inside before you freeze. She didn't move. I said get inside. Why? The question caught him off guard. What? Why are you letting me stay? She looked up at him now, eyes red-rimmed but dry. No tears, just exhaustion. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Gideon didn't have an answer for that. Or maybe he did, but he wasn't ready to say it out loud. Because the truth was, he saw something in her face that he recognized, the same thing he saw in the mirror every morning. Someone who'd already given up. Doesn't matter, he said finally. You're here now? Get inside. She picked up the duffel bag and walked toward the cabin, moving slowly, one hand pressed against her lower back. Gideon watched her go, then looked down at the axe still gripped in his hands. What the hell was he doing? He should have sent her away. Should have told that bastard to turn the truck around. Should have stayed out of it entirely. That's what he'd been doing for 3 years, staying out of everything, keeping the world at arm's length, letting the silence swallow him whole. But he hadn't, and now she was inside his cabin. Gideon drove the axe into the chopping block and followed her in. The interior was Spartan. One main room with a wood stove, a table, 2 chairs, a narrow cot against the far wall. A doorway led to a smaller room, what might have been a bedroom once, though Gideon used it for storage now. Shelves lined with canned goods, boxes of ammunition, tools, no electricity, no running water. A hand pump outside brought up well water, and an outhouse stood 50 yards into the trees. Lena stood in the middle of the room, still holding the duffel bag, looking around like she'd just walked into a prison cell. You can sleep there, Gideon pointed at the cot. I'll take the floor. You don't have to set. I'm taking the floor. She set the bag down carefully. Okay. There's a stove, keeps the place warm if you feed it. Wood's outside. You know how to build a fire? No? You'll learn. There's food in the back room. Not much, but enough for a while. Water pumps outside. Outhouse is past the wood pile. She nodded slowly, taking it all in. You allergic to anything? He asked. No. Good. When's the baby due? Her hand moved to her belly instinctively. 6 weeks, maybe less. 6 weeks. Christ. You been seeing a doctor? Not in a while. How long's a while? 2 months. Gideon rubbed his face. This was a mistake. A massive, irreversible mistake. He should walk her back down the mountain right now, drive her to the clinic in town, hand her off to someone who actually knew what they were doing. But he didn't. Any complications? He asked instead. They said everything was fine at my last checkup. That was 2 months ago. I know. He pulled out one of the chairs at the table. Sit down. You're shaking. She sat. He moved to the stove, grabbed a pot, and filled it with water from a plastic jug on the counter. He set it on the stove to heat. Tea or coffee? I'm not supposed to have caffeine. Tea then. He found a box of chamomile, dropped a bag in a chipped mug, and waited for the water to boil. Lena sat at the table with her hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing. What's your name? She asked after a while. Gideon? That's from the Bible, isn't it? Don't know, don't care. She almost smiled. Almost. I'm Lena. I heard. The water started to bubble. Gideon poured it over the tea bag and set the mug in front of her. Drink. Warm yourself up. She wrapped both hands around the mug, but didn't drink, just held it. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me yet. Why not? Because you don't know what you're in for. She looked at him then, really looked at him. Neither do you. He couldn't argue with that. Over the next few hours, Gideon showed her the basics. How to feed the stove without smothering the fire, where the food was stored, how to use the hand pump without breaking it. She absorbed everything quietly, asking few questions, moving like someone who'd learned a long time ago not to take up too much space. By late afternoon, the temperature outside had dropped to single digits. The wind rattled the shutters. Gideon pulled out 2 cans of soup, dumped them in a pot, and heated it on the stove. They ate in silence. After dinner, Lena retreated to the cot, lying down on her side with her back to the room. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just curled up and closed her eyes. Gideon cleaned the dishes, fed the stove, and spread out a sleeping bag on the floor near the door. He lay there in the dark, listening to the wind and the sound of her breathing. He hadn't shared a space with another person in 3 years. It felt wrong, invasive, like someone had cracked open his skull and shone a light into all the places he'd kept carefully hidden. But there was something else, too. Something he didn't want to name. Relief, maybe. Or just the faintest echo of what it felt like to have a purpose again. He pushed the thought away and closed his eyes. The next morning he woke to the smell of smoke. Not the good kind, the sharp, acrid smell of something burning wrong. He shot upright, heart hammering, and saw Lena crouched in front of the stove, coughing, waving smoke away from her face. "What are you doing?" he barked. "I was trying to start the fire." "You're smothering it." He pushed past her, grabbed the poker, and rearranged the wood. Within seconds, flames caught properly, and the smoke began to clear. "I told you how to do this," he said, more sharply than he meant to. "I know. I thought I had it." "Well, you didn't." She stepped back, arms crossed. "Sorry." He glanced at her. She looked worse this morning, pale, drawn, dark circles under her eyes. "You sleep okay?" "No." "Why not?" "I don't sleep well anywhere." He grunted. "Get used to it. You're going to be here a while." "How long?" "However long it takes." "For what?" He didn't answer that. Instead, he grabbed his coat. "I'm going out to check the traps. Don't touch the stove again. You want it warmer, tell me. I'll do it." "I can learn." "Not today." He left before she could argue. The traps were empty. Snow had drifted over 2 of them, rendering them useless. Gideon reset them, checked the snares along the creek bed, and came back with nothing but cold hands and a headache. When he got back to the cabin, Lena was sitting at the table with a book. Some paperbacks she must have brought with her. She didn't look up when he came in. "Find anything?" she asked. "No." "What do we do if the traps stay empty?" "We eat what we've got and hope they don't." She set the book down. "How long will the food last?" "Couple weeks. Maybe 3 if we're careful." "And then?" "Then we go into town." "I thought you didn't go into town." He hung up his coat. "I don't." "So what do we do?" "We'll figure it out." She stood up, wincing slightly, one hand on her belly. "You don't have to keep me here. If I'm a burden, just say so. I can leave." "And go where?" "I don't know. Somewhere." "You got money?" "No." "Got a place to stay?" "No." "Got anyone who gives a damn whether you live or die?" Her jaw tightened. "No." "Then sit down and stop talking about leaving." They stared at each other. For a moment, Gideon thought she might fight him on it, might grab her bag and walk out into the snow just to prove a point. But she didn't. She sat back down, picked up the book, and said nothing. Gideon turned away and started pulling together something that resembled lunch. 3 days passed. They fell into a fragile routine. Gideon woke early, checked the traps, chopped wood. Lena tried to help where she could, fetching water, organizing the shelves, mending a tear in one of his shirts with a needle and thread she'd brought. She was quiet, almost invisible. But she was there, and Gideon couldn't ignore that. On the 4th morning, he found her outside in the snow, bent over the hand pump, struggling to fill a bucket. "What are you doing?" he called. "Getting water." "You shouldn't be lifting that." "I can manage." "I said you shouldn't be lifting it." She straightened, breathing hard. "I have to do something. I can't just sit inside all day." "Why not?" "Because I'll go crazy." He walked over, took the bucket from her hands, and filled it himself. "You're pregnant." You need to rest. I've been resting for months. It doesn't help. Doesn't help with what? She looked away. Nothing? He carried the bucket inside and set it by the stove. She followed him in, brushing snow off her sleeves. I'm not fragile, she said. Didn't say you were. You're treating me like I'm made of glass. You're 6 weeks from giving birth in the middle of nowhere. That makes you fragile whether you like it or not. Her eyes flashed. You don't know anything about me. I know you got dumped up here by your own father. I know you don't have anywhere else to go. That's enough. It's not enough. You don't know why I'm here. You don't know what I did. Don't care. Why not? Because it doesn't matter. It does to me. Gideon turned to face her. You want to tell me? Fine. Tell me. But it's not going to change anything. You're still here, and I'm still letting you stay. So whatever you did, whatever you think you deserve, keep it to yourself unless you actually want to talk about it. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. I don't want to talk about it. Then don't. She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand and turned away. Gideon watched her for a moment, then went back to the stove. Neither of them spoke for the rest of the day. That night, the wind picked up. It howled through the pines, shaking the cabin walls, rattling the shutters like something trying to get in. Gideon fed the stove and checked the door twice to make sure it was latched. Lena lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling. Does it always get this loud? She asked. Sometimes. It sounds like the whole mountain's coming down. It's not. How do you know? Because I've been through worse. She turned her head to look at him. What's worse than this? He didn't answer. She sat up slowly, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. You don't talk much, do you? No. Why not? Nothing to say. Everyone's got something to say. Not me. She studied him in the firelight. You're running from something. You don't know that. Yes, I do. I recognize it. He met her eyes. Yeah? What are you running from? She looked away. Everything? The wind screamed outside, the fire crackled. For a long time, neither of them said anything. Then Lena spoke again, quieter this time. I got pregnant by someone I shouldn't have. Someone who didn't love me, didn't even like me, probably. But I thought... She stopped, shook her head. I thought it would be different. I thought he'd stay. But he didn't. And when I told my parents, they called me a whore. My mom wouldn't even look at me. And my dad, her voice cracked. He said I ruined everything, that I was an embarrassment, that he was done with me. Gideon didn't move. I tried to get rid of it, she continued. The baby. I went to a clinic, sat in the waiting room for 2 hours, but I couldn't do it. I don't know why. I just couldn't. She laughed bitterly. So now I'm here, stuck, waiting for something I don't even want. You want it, Gideon said quietly. What? The baby. You want it, otherwise you wouldn't be here. You don't know what I want. You're right, but you didn't get rid of it. That means something. She wiped her eyes again. Maybe I'm just a coward. Maybe. Or maybe you're braver than you think. She looked at him, surprised. Gideon stood up and added another log to the fire. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be hard. Why? Because every day up here is hard. She lay back down, pulling the blanket tight. Gideon stretched out on the floor and closed his eyes. Outside, the wind kept howling. The next week brought a cold snap that dropped temperatures below zero. The hand pump froze twice. Gideon had to thaw it with boiling water, a process that took hours and left his hands raw. The trap stayed empty. Food was running low. Lena tried to help more, but her body was working against her. She moved slower, tired faster, slept fitfully. Gideon could see the strain on her face, the way she winced when she stood up, the way she pressed a hand to her back when she thought he wasn't looking. One morning, she didn't get out of bed. You sick? He asked. Just tired. You need to eat. I'm not hungry. He made oatmeal anyway and brought it to her. Eat. She pushed herself up with effort and took the bowl. You're bossy. And you're stubborn. She almost smiled. Fair. He sat down at the table and watched her eat. She managed half the bowl before setting it aside. That's not enough, he said. It's all I can manage. You're eating for two. I know, but I feel sick all the time. When's the last time you felt the baby move? She thought about it. Yesterday, I think. You think? It moves a lot. I can't keep track. Gideon frowned. He didn't know much about pregnancy, but he knew enough to know that I think wasn't a good answer. If anything changes, if you stop feeling it move, if you start bleeding, anything, you tell me. Understand? Okay. I'm serious. I said okay. He stood up and grabbed his coat. I'm going out. Where? To find food. The traps. Forget the traps. I'm going hunting. Her eyes widened. Do you have a gun? Yeah. What are you hunting? Whatever I can find. He left before she could ask more questions. The forest was silent except for the crunch of his boots in the snow. Gideon carried an old rifle, a Remington 700 he'd owned for 15 years. He hadn't fired it in over a year, hadn't needed to. But now, with food running low and Lena growing weaker, he didn't have a choice. He tracked for hours, found deer prints near the creek, followed them uphill, lost them in a rocky stretch where the snow thinned out. He kept going. His hands went numb. His face burned from the cold. Finally, just before dusk, he saw it. A mule deer, maybe 100 yards out, picking its way through the trees. Gideon dropped to one knee, brought the rifle up, and steadied his breathing. The deer stopped, ears flicking. He had one shot. He took it. The rifle cracked. The deer stumbled, then dropped. Gideon waited, watching. When it didn't move, he stood and walked over. Clean shot through the chest. It had died fast. He field-dressed it there, working quickly in the fading light, his hands slick with blood and cold. By the time he hauled it back to the cabin, it was full dark and he was shaking from exhaustion. Lena was waiting by the door. You got something. Yeah. That's a lot of meat. It'll last a while. He hung the carcass from a beam outside and started butchering it by lantern light. Lena watched from the doorway, wrapped in a blanket. Can I help? She asked. No. I could. Go inside. You're letting the heat out. She hesitated, then went back in. Gideon worked for another 2 hours, cutting the meat into portions, wrapping them in cloth, hanging some to freeze and storing the rest in the cold cellar beneath the cabin. When he finally came inside, his hands were raw and his back ached. Lena had made tea. She handed him a mug without a word. Thanks, he said. You're welcome. They sat in silence, drinking tea, the fire crackling between them. That was a good shot, she said after a while. How do you know? I heard it. One shot. That means you didn't miss. Yeah. Where'd you learn to shoot like that? My father. Was he a hunter? He was a lot of things. She didn't push, just sipped her tea and watched the fire. Gideon set his mug down. You should get some sleep. Tomorrow I'll teach you how to cook venison. I already know how to cook. Not like this, you don't. She stood up slowly, one hand braced on the table. Gideon? Yeah? Thank you for not giving up on me. He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. She went to the cot and lay down. Gideon stayed at the table, staring into the fire, thinking about the deer, about the way it had dropped, about the way Lena looked at him like he was something more than just a broken man hiding in the woods. He didn't feel like that, but maybe, for the first time in 3 years, he wanted to. The days grew longer. Winter was starting to lose its grip, though the cold remained brutal. Gideon and Lena settled into something that resembled coexistence. He taught her how to use the stove properly, how to stretch the meat, how to melt snow for water when the pump froze. She learned quickly, asked fewer questions, started carrying her own weight. But the silence between them grew heavier. One night, after dinner, she broke it. Why are you up here? She asked. Gideon didn't look up from the fire. Told you, I like being alone. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. You don't trust me. I don't trust anyone. Why not? He turned to face her. Why do you care? Because I'm living with you, because you saved my life, because I want to know who you are. I'm nobody. That's not true. It is. She leaned forward. What happened to you? Nothing you need to know about. Try me. He stared at her for a long moment. Then, against every instinct he had, he spoke. I had a son, he said quietly. He died when he was 6 months old. SIDS. Sudden infant death syndrome. He went to sleep one night and didn't wake up. Lena's face went pale. Gideon? My wife blamed me, said I should have checked on him, should have heard something, should have known. He looked down at his hands. Maybe she was right. Maybe I should have, but I didn't, and he died, and she left. And I came up here because I couldn't stand being anywhere else. The fire popped. The wind moaned outside. I'm sorry, Lena whispered. Don't be. It was 3 years ago. That doesn't make it hurt less. No, he agreed. It doesn't. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Is that why you let me stay? Maybe. You think you can save me because you couldn't save him. I don't think anything. I just didn't want to watch you die. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I'm scared. I know. What if I can't do this? What if I'm a terrible mother? What if... You'll figure it out. How do you know? Because you're still here. Because you didn't give up. That's more than most people can say. She wiped her eyes. You're a good man, Gideon. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. He stood up and added wood to the fire. Get some sleep. She lay down, pulling the blanket over herself. Gideon stayed by the fire, staring into the flames, thinking about his son, about the way he'd looked when he slept, about the weight of him in Gideon's arms, about all the things he'd failed to do. Outside, the wind howled, and inside, for the first time in years, Gideon felt something other than emptiness. He felt fear, because he was starting to care again, and caring meant he could fail again, and failure meant losing everything all over again. The thaw came slowly, reluctantly. Snow turned to slush in the afternoons, then refroze into treacherous ice by nightfall. The creek behind the cabin started to run again, a thin trickle at first, then a steady flow that carved through the remaining snowpack. March bled into April. The days stretched longer, and with them came a shift in the air, something restless and uncertain. Lena was 7 months pregnant now. Her belly had grown so large she could barely see her feet. She moved like someone carrying a boulder, slow and careful, one hand always braced against something solid. The baby kicked constantly, hard enough that Gideon could see the movements from across the room, a foot pressing out, an elbow dragging across her ribs. Feels like there's a boxer in there, she said one morning, wincing as a particularly sharp jab caught her under the ribcage. Gideon looked up from the pot of oatmeal he was stirring. That normal? I don't know. I think so. You think or you know? She pressed her hand to the spot where the baby had kicked. I think. I'm not a doctor, Gideon. Neither am I. Then I guess we're both guessing. He turned back to the stove. The truth was they were both in over their heads. Every day brought new questions neither of them could answer. What if something went wrong during labor? What if the baby came early? What if Lena started bleeding and couldn't stop? Gideon had been reading everything he could find, old medical manuals he'd dug out of storage, pamphlets he'd picked up years ago and never thrown away. None of it felt like enough. You couldn't learn how to deliver a baby from a book written in 1987. You couldn't prepare for the 1,000 things that could go wrong when the nearest hospital was 2 hours away and the roads were still half buried in snow. But he kept reading anyway, because the alternative was admitting he had no idea what he was doing, and that was a truth he wasn't ready to face. Lena eased herself into a chair at the table, breathing hard from the effort. I need to move around more. I'm going stir-crazy in here. Then move around. I mean outside. I want to see something other than these 4 walls. It's still cold out there. I don't care. You'll slip on the ice. I'll be careful. He spooned oatmeal into 2 bowls and set one in front of her. Eat first. Then we'll see. She didn't argue. She was learning when to push and when to let it go. They ate in silence, the only sound the scrape of spoons against chipped ceramic and the crackle of the fire. When they finished, Gideon grabbed his coat. Come on. She looked up, surprised. Really? You wanted to go outside, didn't you? Yeah, but I thought you'd say no. I did say no. You ignored me. So now I'm coming with you to make sure you don't break your neck. She smiled, a real smile, the first one he'd seen in days. You're getting soft. Don't push it. He helped her into her jacket, which barely fit anymore, then led her outside. The air was sharp and clean, cold enough to sting but not unbearable. The sun was out, pale and watery, casting long shadows across the snow. Lena tilted her face up toward it and closed her eyes. I forgot what the sun felt like, she said. It's been out plenty. Not like this. They walked slowly along the edge of the clearing, Gideon staying close in case she stumbled. The snow was crusty and uneven, pocked with holes where it had started to melt. Lena moved carefully, testing each step before committing her weight. Tell me about this place, she said after a while. What do you want to know? How long have you been here? 3 years, give or take. You built the cabin yourself? No. It was here when I found it. Old hunting cabin. Hadn't been used in decades. Why'd you stay? He thought about that. Because no one else wanted it. That's a reason to stay? It was for me. She glanced at him. You really do hate people, don't you? I don't hate them. I just don't need them. Everyone needs people. Not me. That's lonely. It's quiet. She stopped walking and turned to face him. Do you ever regret it, coming up here? No? Not even a little? No. She studied his face like she was looking for cracks in the lie. Maybe she found some. Or maybe she just decided not to push. Either way, she turned and started walking again. They made a slow circuit around the clearing. By the time they got back to the cabin, Lena was breathing hard and her face was flushed. Gideon helped her inside and got her settled on the cot. You okay? He asked. Yeah, just tired. Rest. I'll make lunch. She lay back and closed her eyes. Within minutes, she was asleep. Gideon stood there for a moment watching her. Her face was softer in sleep. The tension smoothed away. She looked young. Too young to be going through this. Too young to have been thrown away like garbage. He turned away and busied himself with the fire. That night, Lena woke him with a sharp gasp. He was on his feet before he was fully awake, heart pounding. What's wrong? I don't know. She was sitting up on the cot, both hands pressed to her belly, her face tight with pain. Something's wrong. Where does it hurt? Everywhere. It feels like... She sucked in another breath. Like something squeezing me. Gideon's blood went cold. How long? I don't know. A few minutes. Is it constant or does it come and go? It comes and goes. Contractions. It had to be. But it was too early. She wasn't due for another month. How far apart? He asked, forcing his voice to stay calm. I don't know. I wasn't timing them. Start timing them now. He grabbed his watch from the table and handed it to her. Then he lit a lantern and started pulling supplies from the storage room, clean towels, water, the first aid kit he'd stocked years ago and never used. His hands were shaking. Lena gasped again, doubling over. Gideon checked the watch, 5 minutes since the last one. They're getting closer, she said, her voice tight with panic. Gideon, it's too early. The baby's not supposed to come yet. I know. So what do? We stay calm. I can't. Yes, you can. He knelt down in front of her, forcing her to look at him. Listen to me. You're going to be okay. We're going to get through this, but you need to stay calm. Can you do that? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Good. Now breathe. In through your nose, out through your mouth. She tried. It didn't work. She was hyperventilating, gulping air, her whole body shaking. Lena, look at me. Breathe with me. In. He inhaled slowly. Out. He exhaled. Again. In. Out. She matched his rhythm, her breathing gradually slowing. The contraction eased. She slumped back against the wall, exhausted. How do you feel? Gideon asked. Like I'm dying. You're not dying. How do you know? Because I won't let you. Another contraction hit. This time she was ready for it. She gripped the edge of the cot and rode it out, breathing hard but not panicking. When it passed, Gideon checked the watch again, 4 minutes. They were speeding up. He stood and grabbed his coat. I'm going to get help. There's no time. There's a ranger station 10 miles south. If I run, you won't make it back in time, and you know it. She grabbed his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. Don't leave me. He looked down at her. Her face was pale, streaked with sweat and tears. She was terrified. So was he. Okay, he said quietly. I'm not going anywhere. He spent the next hour preparing. He boiled water, laid out towels, tried to remember everything he'd read about childbirth. Most of it was useless. The books talked about hospitals and doctors and equipment he didn't have. They didn't talk about what to do when you were alone in a cabin with no phone, no power, and no backup plan. The contractions kept coming, faster, harder. Lena was drenched in sweat, her hair plastered to her forehead. She bit down on a piece of leather to keep from screaming. I can't do this, she gasped between contractions. Yes, you can. No, I can't. I'm not strong enough. You're stronger than you think. You don't know that. I do. You're still here, aren't you? After everything, you're still here. That's strength. She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. I'm scared. I know. What if I die? You're not going to die. You can't promise that. He couldn't, so he didn't. He just took her hand and held it while another contraction tore through her. By midnight, she was fully dilated. Gideon had no idea how he knew that. Just instinct, maybe, or desperation. She was screaming now, past the point of trying to be quiet. The sound echoed through the cabin, raw and primal. I need to push, she gasped. Then push! I don't know how. Your body knows. Just listen to it. She bore down, her face contorting with effort. Nothing happened. She tried again, still nothing. Something's wrong, she sobbed. The baby's stuck. Gideon's mind raced. He thought back to the books, to the chapter on complications. Shoulder dystocia. When the baby's shoulder gets caught on the pelvic bone. He remembered the diagrams, the instructions. Change positions. Get her on her hands and knees. Lena, I need you to move. I can't. Yes, you can. I need you on your hands and knees. Can you do that for me? She nodded, too exhausted to argue. With his help, she shifted positions. It took forever. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain through her. But finally, she was there, on all fours, shaking like a leaf. Now push, Gideon said. She pushed. And this time something shifted. He saw the crown of the baby's head, slick and dark. His heart hammered in his chest. Again, he urged. You're almost there. She pushed again, screaming, and the baby's head emerged. Gideon caught it with shaking hands. One more push, and the shoulders came free. The baby slid out in a rush of blood and fluid, tiny and slippery and silent. Too silent. Gideon's stomach dropped. The baby wasn't breathing. He laid it on a clean towel and wiped its face, clearing the mucus from its nose and mouth. Still nothing. No cry. No movement. Why isn't it crying? Lena gasped. Gideon, why isn't it crying? He didn't answer. He was too busy trying to remember what to do. Stimulate the baby. Rub its back. Clear the airway. He rubbed the tiny back in firm, quick strokes. Nothing. He turned the baby over and tapped its feet. Nothing. Panic clawed at his chest. This couldn't be happening. Not again. He couldn't lose another one. Gideon, I know. He bent down and put his mouth over the baby's nose and mouth, giving 2 gentle puffs of air. The chest rose and fell. He did it again. And again. And then, a sputter. A cough. A thin wailing cry that filled the cabin like a miracle. Gideon nearly collapsed with relief. He wrapped the baby in a towel and handed it to Lena, who was sobbing so hard she could barely hold it. It's a girl, Gideon said, his voice hoarse. Lena cradled the baby to her chest, tears streaming down her face. She's okay? She's okay. But the ordeal wasn't over. Lena was still bleeding, more than she should be. Gideon could see it pooling beneath her, dark and thick. Too much. Way too much. Lena, I need you to lie down. I'm fine. You're bleeding. It's normal. It's not normal. Lie down. Now. She obeyed, too weak to argue. Gideon elevated her legs and pressed towels against the bleeding, trying to stem the flow. But it kept coming. Her face was going pale. her breathing shallow. "Stay with me," he said, his voice sharp with fear. "Lena, stay with me." Her eyes were starting to close. "I'm tired." "I know, but you can't sleep yet. You hear me? You can't sleep." "Just for a minute." "No." He looked around wildly, his mind racing. What else could he do? The book said apply pressure, elevate the legs, keep her warm. He was doing all of that. It wasn't enough. And then he remembered something crazy, something he'd read about once in a survival manual. Cold constricts blood vessels, slows bleeding. He looked at the door, at the snow outside. It was insane, but he was out of options. He scooped Lena up in his arms, baby and all, and carried her outside into the freezing night. She was barely conscious, her head lolling against his shoulder. "What are you doing?" she mumbled. "Saving your life." He laid her down in the snow, the cold biting into his own skin even through his clothes. Lena gasped, her eyes flying open. "It's cold." "I know. I need you to stay here, just for a minute." The cold hit her like a sledgehammer. Her whole body tensed, and slowly, agonizingly slowly, the bleeding began to ease. Gideon counted to 60, then lifted her and carried her back inside. He wrapped her in every blanket he had and held the baby close to her chest for warmth. "You're insane," Lena whispered, her teeth chattering. "Probably." "Did it work?" He checked the towels. The bleeding had slowed to a trickle. "Yeah, it worked." She closed her eyes, a faint smile on her lips. "You saved us." "Don't thank me yet. We're not out of the woods." But they were. Slowly, painfully, they were. Over the next few hours, Lena stabilized. The bleeding stopped. The baby nursed. Gideon sat on the floor watching them both, his whole body shaking with adrenaline and exhaustion. He'd done it. He'd kept them alive. For the first time in 3 years, he hadn't failed. When dawn broke, pale light filtering through the cracks in the shutters, Lena looked over at him. "What do we name her?" Gideon blinked. He hadn't thought about that. "I don't know. What do you want to name her?" She looked down at the tiny face nestled against her chest. "Grace? Grace?" "Yeah, because that's what this is. Grace." Gideon didn't argue. He just nodded. The baby, Grace, slept, and so did Lena. Gideon stayed awake, keeping watch, feeding the fire, making sure they were warm. And somewhere deep inside, in a place he'd thought was dead, something stirred, something that felt almost like hope. The days that followed were a blur. Lena recovered slowly, her strength returning in increments. Grace cried and nursed and slept, a tiny, fragile thing that seemed impossibly delicate. Gideon helped where he could, changing makeshift diapers, heating water, bringing food to Lena when she was too tired to move. It was exhausting. It was terrifying. But it was also something else. It was life. One afternoon, about a week after the birth, Lena sat by the window with Grace in her arms, staring out at the melting snow. "We can't stay here forever." Gideon looked up from the pot he was scrubbing. "Why not?" "Because she needs a doctor, immunizations, a birth certificate." "We'll figure it out." "When?" "When we're ready." "And when will that be?" He didn't have an answer. Lena turned to face him. "My father's going to come back." "What makes you think that?" "Because he always does. Whenever he thinks he's made a point, he comes back to make sure it's stuck." "Let him come." "Gideon, I said let him come." She looked at him for a long moment. "You'd fight him?" "If I had to." "Why?" "Because you're not going back there. Not you, not her." Her eyes filled with tears. "You don't owe us anything." "I know." "Then why?" He set the pot down and walked over to the window. "Because I'm tired of losing people." She reached out and took his hand. He didn't pull away. They stood there in the fading light, the three of them, a makeshift family forged in desperation and blood. Outside, the snow kept melting. And somewhere down the mountain, trouble was already heading their way. If you or someone you know is having a difficult time, free support is available. Find resources. The trouble arrived 2 weeks later, just as the last of the snow began to surrender to mud. Gideon was outside splitting wood when he heard the engines. Not one truck this time. 3. The sound carried up through the trees, grinding and relentless, and he knew before they came into view exactly who it was. He set down the axe and walked to the cabin door. "Lena, get inside. Take Grace to the back room." She was hanging diapers on a line he'd rigged between 2 trees. She turned, saw his face, and didn't ask questions. Just gathered up the wet cloth and hurried inside, moving as fast as her still recovering body would allow. Gideon followed her in and pulled the door shut. Through the window, he watched the trucks navigate the final stretch of road. 2 pickups and a Suburban, all of them newer, all of them clean despite the mud. City trucks, the kind of vehicles that didn't belong up here. "Is it him?" Lena asked from the back room, her voice tight. "Yeah." "How many?" "More than last time." He heard her sharp intake of breath. Grace started to fuss, and Lena murmured something soft to quiet her. Gideon moved away from the window and opened the cabinet where he kept the rifle. He checked the magazine, found it full, and chambered a round. The metallic click was loud in the quiet cabin. "Gideon," Lena called, "don't do anything stupid." "Wasn't planning on it." "I mean it. He's not worth it." He didn't answer, just stood by the door and waited. The trucks pulled into the clearing and stopped in a rough semicircle, engines idling, doors opened. Men climbed out, 5 of them, not counting the driver who stayed behind the wheel of the Suburban. Lena's father was among them, dressed in the same expensive Carhartt jacket, looking like he'd just stepped out of a catalog. The others were younger, harder, the kind of men you hired when you wanted something done and didn't care how it got done. Gideon recognized the type. He'd known men like that in another life, before the mountain, men who thought muscle and money could solve any problem. They fanned out, casual but deliberate, and Lena's father walked to the front. He stopped 20 feet from the cabin and raised his voice. "Hale, I know you're in there. Come on out." Gideon opened the door and stepped onto the porch, rifle held low but visible. "That's close enough." The older man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Relax. We're just here to talk." "Then talk. I want my daughter back. She's not yours to take." "The hell she isn't. She's my blood. Didn't seem to matter when you dumped her here like trash." The man's jaw tightened. "I gave her a chance to figure things out. She's had time. Now it's time to come home." "She doesn't want to go home." "Did she tell you that, or are you deciding for her?" Gideon didn't answer. Behind him, he heard the back room door creak open. He turned his head slightly and saw Lena standing in the doorway, Grace bundled in her arms. "Don't," he said quietly. "I have to. You don't owe him anything." "I know, but he won't leave until he hears it from me." She walked past him onto the porch, moving carefully, her chin lifted. Gideon shifted to put himself between her and the men in the clearing. Lena's father stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then his gaze dropped to the baby in her arms. "So you kept it." "Her name is Grace." "I don't care what you call it. The fact is, you made a mistake, and now you're making it worse by hiding up here with this lunatic." "He's not a lunatic. He saved my life." "He's keeping you prisoner." "No, he's not." "Then come home. Right now. Prove it." Lena's hands tightened on the baby. "I'm not coming home." "Don't be stupid, Lena. You can't raise a kid up here. There's no doctor, no school, no future. You think you're proving something by staying? You're not. You're just being stubborn." "Maybe I am, but it's my choice." "It's the wrong choice." "It's mine." He took a step forward. One of the men behind him shifted, hand drifting toward his belt. Gideon raised the rifle an inch. "Stay where you are," Gideon said. Lena's father stopped, eyes narrowing. "You threatening me?" "I'm telling you to back off." "This is between me and my daughter." "Not anymore." The man's face darkened. "You don't get a say in this." "I do when she's standing on my property." "Your property?" He laughed, harsh and bitter. "You're squatting in a shack in the middle of nowhere. You don't own anything." "I own enough to keep you off it." They locked eyes. The tension stretched thin, ready to snap. One of the younger men put his hand on the older man's shoulder, leaning in to whisper something. Lena's father shrugged him off. "Fine," he said, his voice cold. "You want to do this the hard way? We'll do it the hard way." He turned to Lena. "You've got 24 hours to come to your senses. After that, I'm calling the county sheriff, telling them you're being held against your will, that there's a man up here who's dangerous, who's got a history. Gideon's stomach tightened. I don't have a history. Everyone's got a history. I did some asking around after I left you here. Found out about your boy, about your wife, about how you fell apart and disappeared. He smiled, sharp and mean. Sheriff hears about a man like that living alone with a young woman and a newborn. He'll come running, and when he gets here, you'll lose everything. Lena stepped forward, her voice shaking with anger. You're disgusting. I'm practical. You want to throw your life away on some fantasy? Go ahead, but I'm not letting you drag that baby down with you. She's my daughter, and you're unfit to raise her. Any judge would agree. You don't know that. I know you've got no job, no home, no support. I know you're living in a cabin with no electricity, no running water, and a man you've known for 2 months. That's not a life. That's survival. And survival's not good enough. Lena's face crumpled. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she didn't look away. I'm not going back. Then you're a fool. He turned and walked back to the Suburban. The other men followed, climbing into their trucks. Engines roared to life. Within moments, they were gone, leaving nothing but tire tracks in the mud and a hollow ache in the air. Lena stood frozen on the porch, Grace clutched tight against her chest. Gideon lowered the rifle and set it against the wall. He's bluffing, Gideon said. No, he's not. Her voice was flat. He'll do exactly what he said. And he's right. Any judge would take one look at this place and give him custody. Not if you fight it. With what? I don't have money for a lawyer. I don't have proof that I can take care of her. I don't have anything. You have me. She looked at him, her eyes red and raw. That's not enough. The words hit harder than they should have. Gideon turned away, staring out at the clearing, at the ruts the trucks had left behind. Then what do you want to do? He asked quietly. I don't know. You want to go back? No. Then we figure it out. How? He didn't have an answer, not one that made sense, not one that wouldn't put them all at risk. Inside the cabin, Grace started to cry. Lena rocked her gently, murmuring soft words. But the baby wouldn't settle. She was picking up on the tension, the fear. Babies always did. Gideon picked up the rifle and went back inside. He set it in the corner and busied himself with the stove, building up the fire even though it didn't need it, anything to keep his hands occupied. Lena sat down at the table, still rocking Grace. What if he's right, she said after a while. What if I can't do this? You already are doing it. Barely, and only because you're here. What happens when you're not? I'm not going anywhere. You say that now. But what about a month from now? A year? You didn't sign up for this. Neither did you. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I signed up for it the second I decided to keep her. I just didn't think it would be this hard. Gideon sat down across from her. Nothing worth doing is easy. That's a terrible cliché. Doesn't make it less true. She looked down at Grace, who had finally quieted, tiny fist curled against Lena's chest. I don't want her to grow up thinking she wasn't wanted. She won't. How do you know? Because you're here. Because you're fighting for her. That's what matters. Lena wiped her eyes. I'm scared, Gideon. I know. What if he comes back? What if he brings the sheriff? Then we deal with it. How? He didn't answer. Because the truth was, he didn't know. He'd spent 3 years avoiding exactly this kind of confrontation. 3 years keeping the world at a distance. And now the world had come crashing back in, and he was out of moves. That night, neither of them slept. Gideon sat by the window with the rifle across his lap, watching the road. Lena lay on the cot with Grace, staring at the ceiling. The fire burned low, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Around midnight, Lena spoke. Tell me about your wife. Gideon didn't look away from the window. Not much to tell. You loved her. Yeah. What happened after your son died? He was quiet for a long time. Then, finally, she blamed me. Said I should have been there. Should have checked on him, and she was right. You don't know that. I do. I was in the other room, working. He was asleep in his crib. I should have gone in. Should have made sure he was okay, but I didn't. I figured he was fine. And when she went to check on him, his voice broke. He was already gone. That wasn't your fault. Felt like it. Did she leave right away? No, she stayed for a few months, tried to make it work. But every time she looked at me, I could see it in her eyes, the anger, the blame. So I left instead. Came up here. Figured if I was going to be alone, I might as well do it somewhere no one could find me. Did it help? No. Lena shifted on Scott, adjusting Grace in her arms. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was a long time ago. Doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. He finally turned to look at her. You're too young to be this smart. I'm too young for a lot of things. Doesn't stop them from happening. They fell silent again. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Gideon checked the window one more time, saw nothing but darkness, and settled back in his chair. We'll figure it out, he said, more to himself than to her. Yeah, Lena whispered. We will. But neither of them believed it. The next morning brought rain, cold, relentless rain that turned the clearing into a swamp and the fire road into a river of mud. Gideon went out to check the traps and came back empty-handed and soaked to the bone. Lena made coffee, real coffee, from the last of the grounds they had, and they sat at the table, listening to the rain hammer against the roof. He's not coming today, Lena said. Probably not. But he will come. Yeah. She wrapped her hands around her mug. What are we going to do? I've been thinking about that. And? We leave. She looked up, startled. Leave? Yeah, pack what we can carry and head west. There's Forest Service land about 30 miles from here. We could disappear, start over. With a newborn? People have done it before. That's insane. Maybe, but it's better than waiting here for him to come back with the law. She shook her head. I can't run forever, Gideon. Neither can you. Then what do you suggest? I don't know, but running's not the answer. It's the only answer I've got. Then we need a better one. They argued about it for the rest of the morning. Lena wanted to go into town, talk to a lawyer, see if there was any legal way to keep her father at bay. Gideon thought it was a waste of time, but eventually he gave in. Not because he thought it would work, but because he didn't have a better plan. They left the next day as soon as the rain stopped. Gideon drove the old truck he kept hidden behind the cabin, a rusted-out Chevy that barely ran but got them down the mountain. Lena sat in the passenger seat with Grace bundled in a makeshift car seat fashioned from blankets and rope. It wasn't safe. Nothing about this was safe. The town was small, one of those places that existed only because people needed somewhere to stop on the way to somewhere else. A gas station, a diner, a post office, and a single-story building that housed the county clerk and a part-time lawyer who handled wills and property disputes. Gideon parked in front of the building and turned off the engine. You sure about this? Lena looked down at Grace, who was sleeping peacefully despite the jostling ride. No, but we're here anyway. They went inside. The lawyer was a woman in her 50s, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, who listened to Lena's story without interrupting. When Lena finished, the lawyer leaned back in her chair and sighed. I'm not going to lie to you, she said. This is going to be hard. Your father has resources. You don't. And judges tend to favor stability, especially when it comes to infants. So I'm going to lose her, Lena said flatly. I didn't say that, but you need to be realistic. Right now, you're living in a cabin with no amenities, no steady income, and a man who isn't the baby's father. That doesn't look good. He saved my life. I believe you, but a judge won't care about that. They'll care about what's best for the child. Lena's hands clenched into fists. And you think going back to my father is what's best? I think having a stable home is what's best. Whether that's with your father or with you is something you'll have to prove. How? The lawyer folded her hands on the desk. Get a job. Find a place to live. Show that you can provide for her. And get Mr. Hale here to testify that he's willing to help support you. If you can do all that, you might have a chance. Gideon spoke for the first time. How long would that take? Months? Maybe longer. We don't have months. Then you don't have many options. They left the office in silence. Lena was crying again, quiet tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. Gideon wanted to say something, anything, to make it better. But there was nothing to say. They were halfway back to the truck when a voice called out behind them. Lena? They both turned. A woman stood on the sidewalk, mid-30s, blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked vaguely familiar, though Gideon couldn't place her. Lena's face went pale. "Sarah?" "Oh my gosh, it is you." The woman hurried over, smiling. "I heard you were back in the area. How are you?" "I'm fine, but—" Sarah's gaze dropped to the baby in Lena's arms. "Is this—" "Oh, Lena, she's beautiful." "Thanks. What's her name?" "Grace." "That's lovely." Sarah glanced at Gideon, curiosity flickering in her eyes. This is Gideon," Lena said quickly. "He's helping me." "Oh." Sarah's smile faltered slightly. "Well, that's good. You need all the help you can get with a newborn." She hesitated. "I heard about what happened with your dad. I'm sorry." Lena stiffened. "It's fine. It's not fine. What he did was awful." Sarah reached out and squeezed Lena's arm. "If you need anything, a place to stay, someone to talk to, call me. Okay?" "Okay." Sarah wrote her number on a scrap of paper and pressed it into Lena's hand. Then she hugged her, briefly, and walked away. Gideon and Lena stood there in silence. "Who was that?" Gideon asked. "A friend from high school." "She seemed like someone you could trust?" Lena looked down at the paper in her hand. "I don't know. Maybe." "Then maybe she's a start." Lena folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her pocket. "Maybe." They drove back to the cabin as the sun began to set, the sky streaked with orange and red. Grace slept the whole way. Lena stared out the window, lost in thought. When they got back, Gideon carried the baby inside while Lena followed. He set Grace down gently in the makeshift crib he'd built from an old drawer and some blankets. Then he turned to Lena. "We'll figure it out," he said. She nodded, but she didn't look convinced. That night, as the fire burned low and the darkness pressed in, Gideon made a decision. He didn't tell Lena, didn't want to argue about it, but he knew what he had to do. If her father came back, Gideon would be ready, and this time, he wouldn't back down. The storm hit 3 days later, rolling in from the north like a living thing. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour. Wind tore through the pines, bending them nearly double. Snow followed, not the light, drifting kind, but heavy wet flakes that stuck to everything and piled up fast. Gideon had been preparing since they got back from town. He'd chopped extra wood, stacked it under a tarp near the door. He'd checked the roof for weak spots, reinforced the shutters, brought in extra water. He'd done everything he could think of to make the cabin secure. It wasn't enough. By nightfall, the wind was screaming. Snow blew sideways, finding every crack and gap in the walls. The temperature inside the cabin dropped despite the fire roaring in the stove. Gideon fed it constantly, burning through wood faster than he wanted to, but there was no choice. If the fire went out, they'd freeze. Lena huddled on the cot with Grace wrapped in every blanket they had. The baby was fussy, crying on and off, sensing the chaos around her. Lena tried to nurse her, but Grace kept pulling away, frustrated. "She's cold," Lena said, her voice tight with worry. "I know." Gideon added another log to the fire. "Keep her close. Your body heat's the best thing for her right now." "What if it's not enough?" "It will be." "You don't know that." He didn't, but he wasn't going to say it. The storm raged through the night. Gideon didn't sleep. He sat by the stove, monitoring the fire, listening to the wind try to tear the cabin apart. Around 3 in the morning, he heard a crack outside, loud enough to cut through the howling, and then a crash. Something had come down. A tree, probably. He hoped it hadn't hit the woodpile. By dawn, the storm had eased slightly. The wind was still fierce, but the snow had stopped. Gideon pulled on his coat and went outside to assess the damage. A massive pine had fallen across the clearing, missing the cabin by maybe 10 feet. Branches were scattered everywhere. The tarp over the woodpile had torn loose, and half the wood was buried in snow. The outhouse had blown over completely. "Damn it," he muttered. He spent the next 2 hours digging out the wood and dragging it closer to the cabin. His hands went numb despite the gloves. His face burned from the cold, but he kept working because stopping meant giving up, and he wasn't ready to do that. When he finally came back inside, Lena was trying to get Grace to eat. The baby was screaming, red-faced and inconsolable. "She won't nurse," Lena said, her voice cracking. "I don't know what's wrong." Gideon peeled off his wet gloves and coat. When's the last time she ate? Last night. Maybe 8 hours ago. 8 hours was too long. He knelt down next to the cot. Let me see her. Lena handed Grace over reluctantly. The baby was warm, too warm. Her forehead was hot to the touch. She's got a fever, Gideon said. Lena's face went white. What do we do? We cool her down, get her temperature under control. How? He stood and grabbed a clean cloth, dampened it with water from the bucket, and pressed it gently to Grace's forehead. The baby screamed louder, thrashing in his arms. She hates it, Lena said. I know, but we have to bring the fever down. What if it doesn't work? What if she's really sick? Then we take her to a hospital. In this? Lena gestured at the window where snow was starting to fall again. We'd never make it down the mountain. We'd make it. You don't know that. He didn't. But he kept the cloth on Grace's forehead, kept murmuring soft words to her even though she couldn't understand them. After what felt like an eternity, the screaming eased. Grace's eyes fluttered closed. She wasn't calm, but she was quieter. Gideon handed her back to Lena. Try nursing her again. This time, Grace latched on. She drank for a few minutes, then fell asleep mid-feed, exhausted. Lena cradled her close, tears streaming down her face. I thought we were going to lose her. We're not. You can't promise that. I know, but we're not. She looked up at him. Why do you keep doing this? Doing what? Saving us. Over and over. You don't owe us anything. He sat down on the floor, his back against the wall. Maybe I owe myself. What does that mean? It means I failed once. I'm not doing it again. Your son. I know what happened to my son, and I know it wasn't my fault, even if it feels like it was. But this? He gestured at Lena and Grace. This I can control. This I can fix. We're not a problem you can fix, Gideon. I didn't say you were. Then what are we? He didn't have an answer for that. Or maybe he did, but he wasn't ready to say it out loud. So he just stood and went back to the stove, feeding it more wood, keeping the fire alive. The hours crawled by. The storm intensified again, hammering the cabin with renewed fury. The wind found new ways to get inside, whistling through cracks Gideon had thought were sealed. He stuffed rags into the gaps, but it barely helped. The temperature kept dropping. Around midday, Grace's fever spiked again. This time, it was worse. Her skin was burning, her breathing shallow and rapid. Lena was panicking, pacing the small space with the baby in her arms. We have to do something, she said. We have to get her to a doctor. Gideon looked out the window. The snow was coming down so thick he could barely see 10 feet. We won't make it. We have to try. Lena, listen to me. The road's impassable. We'd get stuck halfway down and freeze to death. All three of us. So what do? Just sit here and watch her die? No. We keep her cool. We keep her hydrated. We ride this out. And if that's not enough? It will be. But even as he said it, doubt gnawed at him. He'd delivered the baby, kept them alive through the worst of winter, but this was different. This was something he couldn't fix with his hands or his will. This required medicine, equipment, knowledge he didn't have. He filled a basin with lukewarm water and helped Lena sponge Grace down, trying to bring her temperature down degree by degree. The baby whimpered but didn't have the strength to fight. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused. Come on, sweetheart, Lena whispered. Stay with us. Please stay with us. Gideon watched them, his chest tight with fear. He'd lost one child. He couldn't lose another. Not like this. Not when he'd fought so hard to keep them safe. The afternoon bled into evening. Grace's fever finally broke around 7, dropping slowly but steadily. By 9, she was nursing again, weakly but consistently. By midnight, she was sleeping peacefully, her breathing even and deep. Lena collapsed on the cot beside her, too exhausted to move. Gideon covered them both with every blanket he had and added more wood to the fire. Then he sat at the table and put his head in his hands. His whole body was shaking, not from cold, but from the adrenaline crash, from the terror that had been coiling in his gut for hours. He thought they were going to lose her, really thought it, and the helplessness of it, of being able to do nothing but wait and hope, had nearly broken him. Gideon? He looked up. Lena was watching him from the cot, her face pale in the firelight. You okay? She asked. Yeah. You're shaking. I'm fine. She sat up carefully, making sure not to wake Grace. No, you're not. He didn't argue, just looked away. You were scared, she said softly. Yeah, so was I. I know. She was quiet for a moment, then, thank you for not giving up on her. On us. I wasn't going to. I know, but still. Thank you. He nodded, not trusting his voice. The storm lasted another day and a half. By the time it finally broke, they were down to their last few logs and running dangerously low on food. Grace's fever had subsided, but she was weak and fussy. Lena was exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, moving like someone running on fumes. Gideon knew they couldn't keep going like this. Something had to give. On the third morning after the storm, he woke to a sound that made his blood run cold. Footsteps. Outside. Crunching through the snow. He grabbed the rifle and moved to the window, peering through a gap in the shutters. What he saw made his jaw tighten. Not men this time. An animal. A bear, huge and gaunt, fur matted with snow and mud. It was nosing around the fallen tree, sniffing at the ground, clearly searching for food. Bears should have been in hibernation this time of year, but this one looked starved, probably woken early by the storm, desperate enough to risk coming this close to humans. Lena appeared beside him, Grace in her arms. What is it? Bear, don't make any noise. Will it go away? Eventually, if it doesn't find anything. But even as he said it, the bear turned toward the cabin. Its nose lifted, testing the air. It had caught the scent of something, probably the venison still hanging in the cold cellar. The bear moved closer, slow and deliberate. It stopped at the woodpile, knocked over a few logs, then kept coming. Gideon, Lena whispered. I know. The bear reached the cabin and stood on its hind legs, massive paws pressing against the wall. The whole structure shook. Grace started to cry. Get in the back room, Gideon said quietly. Now. What are you going to do? Just go. She didn't argue. She hurried into the back room and shut the door. Gideon moved to the main door, rifle raised. The bear was scraping at the wall now, testing it. The wood groaned under the pressure. If it decided to push harder, it would break through. The cabin wasn't built to withstand something like that. He opened the door a crack and fired a shot into the air. The crack echoed across the clearing. The bear dropped to all fours and backed up, but it didn't run. It just stood there, watching him. Get out of here, Gideon shouted, firing another shot into the snow near the bear's feet. The bear flinched but held its ground. It was too hungry to be scared. Too desperate. Gideon's mind raced. He had maybe 5 rounds left. If the bear charged, he'd have 1, maybe 2 shots to stop it. And if he missed, he didn't let himself finish that thought. Instead, he stepped fully outside, rifle aimed at the bear's chest. I said get out of here. The bear huffed, a sound like a growl and a sigh mixed together. It paced back and forth, clearly torn between hunger and self-preservation. Gideon stood his ground, finger on the trigger, heart hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. The standoff lasted maybe 30 seconds, though it felt like an hour. Then, finally, the bear turned and lumbered off into the trees, disappearing into the snow. Gideon stood there for a long moment, heart hammering before lowering the rifle. His hands were shaking. Lena opened the back room door. Is it gone? For now. Will it come back? Probably. It's starving. It'll keep looking for food until it finds some, or dies trying. So what do? We make sure there's nothing here for it to find. He spent the rest of the day hauling the remaining venison out of the cold cellar and burying it a quarter mile into the woods, far enough that the scent wouldn't lead the bear back to the cabin. It was backbreaking work in the deep snow, and by the time he finished, he was soaked with sweat and shaking from exhaustion. When he got back, Lena had soup heating on the stove. It was thin, mostly water and a few scraps of meat, but it was hot, and that was something. They ate in silence. Grace slept in her crib, finally peaceful. How much food do we have left? Lena asked. Enough for maybe a week, if we stretch it. And then? Then we go into town, restock. With what money? He didn't answer. She set down her spoon. Gideon, we can't keep doing this. Living day to day, hoping nothing goes wrong. It's not sustainable. I know. So what do we do? I don't know. Yes, you do. You just don't want to say it. He looked at her. What do you want me to say? That we need help. That we can't do this alone. We've been doing it alone. Barely, and barely's not good enough. Not for her. She glanced at Grace. She deserves better than this. I know she does. Then let's give it to her. How? I don't know, but we figure it out together, not you carrying everything on your shoulders. Together. He wanted to argue, wanted to say he didn't need help, didn't need anyone, but the words stuck in his throat because they weren't true. He was tired, he was scared, and he was running out of answers. Okay, he said quietly. Okay? Yeah, together. She reached across the table and took his hand. He didn't pull away. That night they made a plan. Lena would reach out to Sarah, the woman from town, see if she could help. Maybe offer a place to stay temporarily, or connect them with resources. Gideon would go into town, sell what little he had of value, and try to scrape together enough money to buy food and supplies. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something. They were still discussing the details when they heard the trucks again. This time there was no warning, no sound of engines climbing the mountain, just the sudden glare of headlights cutting through the darkness, and then voices shouting outside. Gideon grabbed the rifle and moved to the window. His stomach dropped. 4 trucks this time, maybe 8 or 9 men. And standing at the front, illuminated by the headlights, was Lena's father. "Lena Cross," he shouted. "I know you're in there. Come out. Now." Lena's face went pale. "He brought more people." "Yeah." "What do we do?" "You stay inside. I'll handle it." "Gideon, I said I'll handle it." He opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. The men in the clearing spread out, forming a loose semicircle. Some of them had guns, not pointed at him but visible, a show of force. Lena's father stepped forward. "Where is she?" "Inside, where she wants to be." "She doesn't know what she wants. She's confused, scared. You're taking advantage of that." "I'm not taking advantage of anyone." "Then let her go. She's free to leave anytime she wants. She's choosing to stay." "Bullshit. You've got her trapped up here, cut off from everyone. That's not a choice. That's coercion." "Believe what you want. Doesn't make it true." One of the younger men stepped forward, hand on his holster. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, old man. Your call." Gideon's grip tightened on the rifle. "Back off." "Or what? You gonna shoot all of us?" "If I have to." The man laughed. "You're crazy." "Maybe, but I'm also serious." The tension stretched taut. Gideon could feel it in the air, in the way the men shifted their weight, in the way Lena's father watched him with cold, calculating eyes. Another man, older and thicker through the chest, moved his hand toward his belt. Gideon tracked the movement without moving the rifle. "I wouldn't," Gideon said quietly. The man stopped. Lena's father held up a hand. "Nobody needs to do anything stupid. We're just here to bring my daughter home. She is home." "This isn't a home. It's a shack. My daughter deserves better than this." "Your daughter deserves to make her own choices. She's 23 years old and has a baby. She's not capable of making good choices. That's been proven." Gideon felt his jaw tighten. "She made a choice when she kept that baby. That took more guts than anything you've ever done." "Don't lecture me about my daughter." "Then don't treat her like property." The father's face darkened. "You don't know anything about her. You've known her for what, 2 months, 3? I've known her whole life. And you abandoned her the first time she needed you. I gave her a chance to grow up. You dumped her in the snow and drove away. I gave her exactly what she deserved." The words hung in the cold air. Gideon stared at the man, this father who could say something like that about his own daughter, and felt something harden inside him. "Get off my property," Gideon said. "This isn't your property. Close enough. Get off it, or I'll put a hole in your truck." "You threatening me? I'm telling you to leave." Then the door behind Gideon opened. Lena stepped out, Grace bundled in her arms. "Don't," Gideon said without looking back. "I have to." She walked past him to the edge of the porch. The men in the clearing stared at her. Her father's expression shifted. Something that might have been relief or maybe just satisfaction. "Lena," he said. Come here. Let's talk. We can talk from here. Don't be ridiculous. Come down here. No. His jaw tightened. You're being stubborn. I'm being smart. There's a difference. You think staying up here with this man is smart? Look at you. You're skin and bones. That baby looks half frozen. This isn't a life. It's my life. It's a mistake. Then it's my mistake to make. He took a step forward. Lena, please. I'm trying to help you. No, you're not. You're trying to control me, just like you always have. That's not true. Yes, it is. You never cared what I wanted. You only cared about what made you look good. And when I didn't fit into that picture anymore, you threw me away. I gave you a chance to figure things out. You dumped me in the middle of nowhere and drove away. That's not a chance. That's abandonment. I was trying to teach you a lesson. Well, I learned it. I learned that the only person I can count on is myself, and maybe him. She glanced back at Gideon, but definitely not you. Her father's face darkened. You ungrateful. Don't. Her voice was sharp. Don't you dare. I spent my whole life trying to make you proud, trying to be perfect. And the one time I made a mistake, you threw me away like garbage. So don't stand there and call me ungrateful. You got yourself pregnant by some loser who didn't even stick around. What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to be my father. The words echoed across the clearing. Grace started to cry. Lena rocked her gently, tears streaming down her own face. You were supposed to help me, she continued, her voice breaking. You were supposed to love me anyway, but you couldn't do that, because it would have made you look bad. And that's all you've ever cared about. Her father stood there, silent, his face unreadable. So here's what's going to happen, Lena said, her voice steadier now. You're going to get back in your trucks and leave. And you're not going to come back. Because I'm not your daughter anymore. I haven't been for a long time. Lena, I'm done. We're done. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head. You've got 24 hours to come to your senses. After that, I'm filing for custody, and I will win. Then I guess I'll see you in court. You don't have a lawyer. I'll find one. With what money? I'll figure it out. You're delusional. Maybe, but I'm not going back with you. He turned to the men behind him. Let's go. But before they could move, one of the younger men spoke up. What if she doesn't want to come? We gonna drag her out? The father hesitated. Because I didn't sign up to kidnap nobody, the man continued. You said we were just here to talk. We are talking. Looks like she don't want to talk. Another man shifted uncomfortably. Yeah, man, this feels wrong. The father's face reddened. I'm paying you to help bring your daughter home, not to drag her out against her will. The first man looked at Lena. You want to leave, miss? No. Then I'm out. He turned and walked back to his truck. Two others followed. The father stood there, watching his hired help abandon him, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. The remaining men looked uncertain. Fine, he said finally. We'll do this the legal way. But mark my words, Lena, you will lose that child. And when you do, don't come crying to me. I won't. He climbed back into the Suburban. The remaining trucks fired up, backed out, and disappeared down the mountain. Silence rushed back in. Lena stood on the porch, shaking. Grace whimpered in her arms. Gideon lowered the rifle. You okay? No. You did good. I told him I'd see him in court. We don't even have a case. We'll build one. How? I don't know, but we will. She turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. I'm so tired, Gideon. I know. I don't know if I can keep doing this. You can. You're stronger than you think. Stop saying that. It's true. It doesn't feel true. He set the rifle down and pulled her into his arms, carefully, because she was still holding Grace. She leaned into him, her whole body shaking with silent sobs. I've got you, he said quietly. Both of you. I've got you. And for the first time since she'd arrived, he meant it. Not just as words, but as a promise, a commitment. He didn't know how they were going to win this fight, didn't know if they even could, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let them lose. They went back inside. Gideon locked the door and set the rifle in the corner. Lena sat at the table, still holding Grace, staring at nothing. "What happens now?" she asked after a long silence. "Now we prepare." "For what?" "For whatever comes next." She looked at him. "You really think we can win this?" "I think we have to try." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got." She was quiet for a moment, then, "What if we lose? What if the court gives him custody?" "Then we fight harder." "There won't be anything left to fight for." "There's always something left." She shook her head. "You don't understand. If I lose her, if they take her from me, I won't survive it." "Yes, you will." "No, I won't. She's all I have." "You have more than you think." "Like what?" He sat down across from her. "You have me." She looked up, surprised. "I'm not going anywhere," he continued. "Whatever happens, I'm here. You understand that?" "Why?" "Because I choose to be." "That's not a reason." "It's the only reason that matters." She studied his face, searching for something. Whatever she found must have been enough, because she reached across the table and took his hand. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay? Yeah, okay." They sat there in the quiet, hands clasped, while Grace slept between them. Outside, the wind had died down. The storm was over. But they both knew another one was coming. They didn't sleep that night. Lena sat at the table with Grace in her arms, staring at nothing. Gideon paced the small cabin like a caged animal, checking the window every few minutes, rifle never far from his hand. "He meant it," Lena said finally, "about taking her." "I know." "So what do we do?" Gideon stopped pacing. "We fight back." "With what?" "We don't have money for lawyers. We don't have proof of anything. All we have is this cabin and each other, and that's not enough." "Then we make it enough." She looked up at him, exhausted and desperate. "How?" He didn't have an answer yet, but he knew someone who might. The next morning, as soon as there was enough light to see by, Gideon drove them back into town. The roads were still treacherous from the storm, ice hiding under fresh snow, but he navigated them carefully. Lena held Grace in the passenger seat, both of them bundled against the cold. They went straight to Sarah's house. It was a small ranch-style place on the edge of town, with a swing set in the yard and Christmas lights still strung along the gutters, even though it was April. Gideon parked in the driveway and turned to Lena. "You ready?" "No, but let's do it anyway." Sarah answered the door in sweatpants and an oversized sweater, a mug of coffee in her hand. Her eyes widened when she saw them. "Lena, what are you doing here so early? I need help." "Okay, come in." They followed her inside. The house was warm and cluttered in a lived-in way. Toys scattered across the floor, dishes in the sink, photos covering every wall. It felt like a home, the kind Lena had never had. Sarah cleared space on the couch and gestured for them to sit. "What's going on?" Lena told her everything. About her father, about the threats, about the impossible choice she was facing. Sarah listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with every word. When Lena finished, Sarah set down her coffee mug. "Your father's a piece of work." "Yeah. And he's really threatening to take Grace?" "He already filed the paperwork. We got served yesterday." Lena pulled the crumpled document from her pocket and handed it over. Sarah scanned it, her jaw tightening. "This is garbage. He's claiming neglect and unsafe living conditions, but he doesn't have any real evidence." "He doesn't need evidence," Lena said bitterly. "He just needs a judge who looks at me and sees a screw-up." "That's not how it works." "That's exactly how it works. I'm 23, broke, and living in a cabin with no electricity. He's got money, stability, and a lawyer. Who do you think the judge is going to believe?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she stood up. "Wait here." She disappeared into another room and came back with a laptop. She sat down and started typing, her fingers flying across the keys. "What are you doing?" Lena asked. "Finding you a lawyer who isn't scared of your father." "I can't afford—" "You let me worry about that." For the next hour, Sarah made calls. She talked to people Lena didn't know, pulled favors, argued and pleaded. Gideon sat quietly, listening, watching this woman fight for someone she barely knew. It reminded him of something he'd forgotten, that there were still good people in the world, people who helped without expecting anything in return. Finally, Sarah hung up the phone and turned to them with a tired smile. Okay, I found someone. Who? Lena asked. Her name's Rebecca Marsh. She's young, but she's good, really good. And she owes me a favor from way back. What kind of favor? The kind that means she'll take your case even though you can't pay her. Lena's eyes filled with tears. Sarah, I can't ask you to. You're not asking, I'm offering, and I don't want to hear another word about it. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just promise me you'll fight for that little girl. I will. Good. Rebecca can meet with you tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock. Her office is above the hardware store on Main Street. Lena stood and hugged Sarah hard. Thank you for everything. Sarah hugged her back. You're going to get through this, you hear me? I hope so. No, you are. Because you're stronger than you think, and you're not alone anymore. When they left Sarah's house, Gideon felt something shift. They still had a long road ahead, but at least now they weren't walking it alone. The meeting with Rebecca Marsh happened the next day. Her office was cramped and cluttered with case files and law books. Rebecca herself was in her early 30s, with short dark hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She listened to their story without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When they finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied them both. Okay, she said. Let's be clear about something. This is going to be hard. Your father has resources, and he's going to use every one of them to paint you as an unfit mother. But the good news is, he's also arrogant, and arrogant people make mistakes. What kind of mistakes? Lena asked. Like overplaying their hand. He's claiming you're being coerced, that you're living in dangerous conditions, that Grace is at risk, but you're here, sitting in my office, clearly making your own decisions. That undermines his whole argument. But I was living in the cabin, with no electricity, no running water. Were you living there by choice? I guess so. I mean, I didn't have anywhere else to go. But Gideon didn't force you to stay? No, he told me I could leave any time. Rebecca made a note. Good. That's important. Now here's what we need to do. We need to show the court that you're taking steps to improve your situation. Finding stable housing, getting a job, building a support system. If we can demonstrate that you're actively working to provide for Grace, his case falls apart. But I don't have any of those things. Not yet, but you will. Rebecca turned to Gideon. What about you? What's your role in all this? Whatever she needs me to be. Are you the father? No. Are you in a relationship with her? Gideon hesitated. He glanced at Lena, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. We're friends, he said finally. Just friends? Yeah. Rebecca made another note. That's actually better. Keeps things cleaner legally. But I'm going to need you to testify. To explain why you took Lena in, what kind of support you've been providing, and why you believe she's capable of raising Grace. I can do that. Good. Because the other side is going to come after you hard. They're going to dig into your past, find anything they can use against you. You need to be ready for that. Gideon's jaw tightened. I'm ready. Are you? Because if there's anything in your history that could hurt Lena's case, I need to know about it now. He was quiet for a moment. Then, my son died 3 years ago. SIDS. My wife blamed me. We separated. I came up here to get away from it. Rebecca's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry. Don't be. It's just the truth. And there's nothing else? No criminal record? No history of violence or substance abuse? No. Then we should be okay. But you need to be prepared for them to bring up your son's death. To suggest that you're somehow responsible, or that you have a pattern of putting children at risk. I didn't put him at risk. I know, but they're going to try to make it look that way. Gideon nodded slowly. I understand. Rebecca turned back to Lena. Okay, here's the plan. You need to find housing in town. Sarah said she'd let you stay with her temporarily, which is perfect. You also need to find work, something stable, even if it's part-time. And we need character witnesses, people who can testify that you're a good mother, that you're responsible, that you're doing everything you can for Grace. I don't know a lot of people here. You know Sarah. That's a start. Anyone else? Lena thought for a moment. There's a woman at the diner. She was always nice to me when I went in. And the clerk at the grocery store. He helped me carry my bags once when I was pregnant. Good. We'll reach out to them. The more people we can get to vouch for you, the better. They spent the next 2 hours going over the details. What Lena should wear to court, how she should answer questions, what to expect from the other side. By the time they left, Lena's head was spinning. You okay? Gideon asked as they walked to the truck. I don't know. This is all so much. We'll get through it. You keep saying that. Because it's true. She stopped walking and turned to face him. What if we don't? What if we lose and they take her? Then we appeal. We keep fighting. For how long? As long as it takes. She searched his face. Why are you doing this? You could walk away. This isn't your fight. It is now. Why? He took a breath. Because when your father dumped you at my cabin, I saw something in you that I recognized. Someone who'd been thrown away. Someone who didn't matter to the people who were supposed to love them. And I've spent 3 years being that person. Hiding from the world because I thought I deserved to be forgotten. But then you showed up and I realized something. What? That maybe I was wrong. Maybe I'm not supposed to disappear. Maybe I'm supposed to be here, helping you, protecting Grace, being part of something that matters. Tears welled up in Lena's eyes. You matter, Gideon. You've always mattered. I'm starting to believe that. She stepped forward and hugged him. He wrapped his arms around her and they stood there in the parking lot holding each other while the world moved around them. When they finally pulled apart, Lena wiped her eyes. Okay, let's do this. Let's build a case. Yeah, let's do it. Over the next 3 weeks, they worked harder than Gideon had ever worked in his life. Lena moved into Sarah's house, taking over the spare bedroom. She got a job at the diner, working 4 shifts a week. The pay was terrible, but it was steady, and it gave her something to put on paper when they went to court. Sarah watched Grace during Lena's shifts, refusing to take any money despite Lena's repeated offers. You need every penny, Sarah said. I've got this. Gideon came into town almost every day. He helped Lena practice her testimony, helped her fill out forms, helped her navigate the bureaucracy of the court system. He also started looking for work himself, not because he needed the money, but because Rebecca said it would look better if he could show steady employment. He found a job at the hardware store, stocking shelves and helping customers. The owner was an old guy named Frank, who didn't ask a lot of questions. He just said, You know your way around tools? Yeah. Good enough? You start Monday. It was simple work, mindless even, but it felt good to be useful again, to be part of the world instead of hiding from it. In the evenings, Gideon would go to Sarah's house and spend time with Lena and Grace. They'd have dinner together, usually something simple that Sarah threw together, and then Lena would put Grace to bed while Gideon cleaned up. It started to feel like a routine, like a life. One night, about 2 weeks before the hearing, Lena found him on the back porch. He was sitting on the steps, staring out at the darkening sky. You okay? She asked. Yeah, just thinking. About what? About how different everything is now. She sat down beside him. Different how? 3 months ago, I was alone. I hadn't talked to another person in weeks. I was just existing, going through the motions. And now, he gestured at the house. Now I'm part of something. You like it? Yeah, I do. Even though it's complicated? Especially because it's complicated, she smiled. You're a strange man, Gideon Hale. I've been told. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Lena spoke again. I'm scared, she said quietly. I know. What if we lose? We won't? You don't know that. No, but I believe it. Why? Because you're fighting for her, and that has to count for something. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I hope you're right. Me too. The day of the hearing arrived faster than either of them expected. Lena woke up early, too nervous to eat. She put on the dress Sarah had bought her, a simple navy blue shift that made her look older, more put together. She pulled her hair back in a neat ponytail and put on minimal makeup. Gideon picked her up at 8. He was wearing the same shirt he'd worn to the meeting with Rebecca, freshly pressed. His hands were shaking as he drove. You nervous? Lena asked. Yeah. Me too. We'll be okay. Promise? I can't promise, but I can hope. They arrived at the courthouse 20 minutes early. Rebecca was waiting for them on the steps, looking sharp in a black suit. You ready? She asked. As ready as we'll ever be, Lena said. Good. Remember what we talked about. Answer the questions honestly. Don't get defensive. And whatever you do, don't let them rattle you. Okay? They walked inside together. The courthouse was old, with high ceilings and wood paneling that had darkened with age. It smelled like paper and floor polish. Lena's father was already there, sitting with his lawyer in the hallway outside the courtroom. He was dressed in an expensive suit, looking every inch the successful businessman. When he saw Lena, his expression didn't change. Just cold, distant. The lawyer with him was exactly what Gideon expected. Mid-50s, slicked back hair, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The kind of man who won cases by intimidation and technicalities. They took their seats on opposite sides of the courtroom. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and glasses perched on the end of her nose. She had the look of someone who'd seen everything and wasn't impressed by much. All rise, the bailiff called. They stood. The hearing began. The other lawyer went first. He painted a picture of Lena as irresponsible, reckless, incapable of providing for a child. He brought up her lack of education, her lack of resources, the fact that she'd been living in a remote cabin with a man she barely knew. Your Honor, he said, this young woman made a series of poor choices that led to her current predicament. She became pregnant outside of marriage. She refused to consider adoption or other responsible options. And when her family tried to help her, she rejected them and chose instead to live in squalor with a virtual stranger. Rebecca objected. Counsel is characterizing the situation in a way that's not supported by the facts. Sustained, the judge said. Stick to what you can prove, counselor. The lawyer nodded and continued. The facts, Your Honor, are these. Ms. Cross has no stable housing, no meaningful employment, no support system beyond the goodwill of strangers, and she's attempting to raise an infant in conditions that are, at best, inadequate and at worst, dangerous. He presented photographs, images of the cabin, taken recently. The rough exterior, the makeshift repairs, the outhouse in the background. It looked even worse in pictures than it did in person. Lena's hands clenched into fists under the table. Then it was Rebecca's turn. She stood and addressed the judge calmly. Your Honor, what counsel has presented is a snapshot of one moment in time. It doesn't reflect the reality of Ms. Cross's situation, nor does it acknowledge the steps she's taken to improve her circumstances. She presented her own evidence, pay stubs from the diner, a letter from Sarah offering stable housing, character references from people who'd known Lena over the past few weeks. Ms. Cross is a young woman who found herself in an impossible situation, Rebecca continued. Her family abandoned her. She had nowhere to go and no resources to fall back on. But instead of giving up, she survived. She found shelter. She delivered a healthy baby. And when she had the opportunity to improve her situation, she took it. She got a job. She found stable housing. She's building a support network. These are not the actions of an unfit mother. These are the actions of someone who is doing everything in her power to provide for her child. The other lawyer stood. Your Honor, the question isn't whether Ms. Cross is trying. The question is whether she's capable, and the evidence suggests she's not. She's 23 years old with no life experience, no education beyond high school, and no demonstrated ability to provide long-term stability for a child. My client is learning, Rebecca shot back. She's growing, she's adapting, and with the support of people like Sarah Mitchell and Gideon Hale, she's building a life for herself and her daughter. The judge held up a hand. I'd like to hear from Ms. Cross herself. Lena stood, her legs shaking. She walked to the witness stand and was sworn in. Rebecca approached her gently. Lena, can you tell the court why you want to keep custody of Grace? Lena took a breath. Because she's my daughter, and I love her. And do you believe you're capable of raising her? I do. I'm learning. I don't know everything, but I'm trying, and I'm getting better every day. What steps have you taken to improve your situation? I got a job. I moved into town with Sarah. I'm saving money. I'm trying to take classes so I can get my degree. And why do you think you deserve to keep Grace? Lena's voice broke. Because I didn't give up on her. Everyone else did. Everyone told me I should get rid of her, that I couldn't handle it, that I was making a mistake. But I didn't listen. I kept her, and I'm going to keep fighting for her no matter what. The other lawyer stood for cross-examination. He was less gentle. Ms. Cross, isn't it true that you were living in a cabin with no electricity or running water? Yes. And isn't it true that you had no prenatal care for the last 2 months of your pregnancy? I couldn't afford it. And isn't it true that you gave birth without any medical supervision? I didn't have a choice. You had choices, Ms. Cross. You chose to stay in that cabin. You chose to cut yourself off from help. Those were your choices, weren't they? Yes, but I was scared. I was scared of what? Of my father, of being sent away, of losing my baby. But you weren't losing your baby. Your father was offering you a home, resources, support, and you refused. Because he wanted to control me. Or because you were too stubborn to accept help when it was offered. Objection, Rebecca said. Argumentative. Sustained. The lawyer changed tack. Ms. Cross, can you tell the court about your relationship with Gideon Hale? He's my friend. Just a friend? Yes. And yet you lived with him for several months? He gave me a place to stay when no one else would. Did he ever make you feel uncomfortable? No. Did he ever touch you inappropriately? No. Did he ever try to control you or manipulate you? No, he saved my life. The lawyer smirked. He saved your life. How dramatic. Rebecca stood. Objection. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained. Move on, counselor. No further questions. Lena stepped down, shaking. Gideon wanted to go to her, to tell her she'd done great, but he couldn't. Not yet. Then it was his turn. He walked to the stand, was sworn in, and sat down. Rebecca approached him with a calm smile. Mr. Hale, can you tell the court how you came to know Lena Cross? Her father brought her to my cabin in the middle of winter and left her there. Did you know her before that? No. And why did you take her in? Gideon thought about how to answer that. Because she needed help, and because I knew what it was like to be abandoned. Can you elaborate? He took a breath. I had a son. He died when he was 6 months old. Sudden infant death syndrome. My wife left me. I blame myself. I've spent the last 3 years alone, hiding from the world. And when Lena showed up, when her father just dumped her like she was nothing, I saw a chance to do something right, to not fail again. In your opinion, is Lena capable of caring for Grace? Yes. Why? Because she fights for her every day. She doesn't give up. She doesn't take the easy way out. She loves that little girl more than anything in the world, and that's what matters. Rebecca nodded. Thank you, Mr. Hale. The other lawyer stood for cross-examination. He was all sharp edges. Mr. Hale, isn't it true that you've been living as a recluse for 3 years? Yes. And isn't it true that you have no experience with children? Not anymore, no. So you, a man with no relevant experience and a history of isolating yourself from society, took in a pregnant woman and helped deliver her baby in a cabin with no medical equipment? That's right. That sounds incredibly reckless. It was necessary. Necessary or self-serving? Gideon frowned. What's that supposed to mean? It means that perhaps you saw an opportunity. A vulnerable young woman, alone, desperate. Perhaps you took her in not out of altruism, but out of some desire for companionship. Gideon's jaw tightened. That's not what happened. How can we be sure? Because I'm telling you. But you're emotionally invested in the outcome of this case, aren't you? You want Lena to keep custody because it benefits you. I want her to keep custody because it's what's right, or because you've developed feelings for her. Objection, Rebecca said, standing. This is completely inappropriate. Your Honor, the other lawyer said smoothly, I'm simply trying to establish the nature of Mr. Hale's relationship with my client's daughter. The nature of our relationship is that I care about her and her baby, Gideon said, his voice hard. And I'm going to keep caring about them, whether this court approves or not. So you admit you have feelings for her? I admit that I care. That's not a crime. No, but it does call into question your objectivity. My objectivity doesn't matter. What matters is that Lena is a good mother, and anyone who can't see that is blind." The lawyer smiled. No further questions. Gideon stepped down, his hands shaking with anger. Lena was crying at the table. Rebecca put a hand on her shoulder. The judge called a recess. They waited in the hallway. Lena paced. Gideon sat on a bench, head in his hands. Sarah showed up with Grace, who was fussy and needed to be fed. Lena took her into a private room while Sarah sat with Gideon. "How's it going?" Sarah asked. "Hard to tell." "You think we'll win?" "I don't know." "Well, I think you will. That judge doesn't look like someone who's easily fooled." "I hope you're right." After what felt like hours, they were called back in. The judge looked tired. She shuffled papers, adjusted her glasses, and finally spoke. "This has been a difficult case," she said. "On one hand, we have a young mother who, by all accounts, loves her child and is working to provide for her. On the other hand, we have a grandfather who is concerned about the child's welfare and has the resources to provide stability." Lena's hand found Gideon's under the table. He squeezed it. "However," the judge continued, "the law is clear. Parental rights are not to be terminated lightly, and while Ms. Cross's circumstances have been challenging, she has demonstrated that she is taking meaningful steps to improve her situation. She has employment, she has housing, she has a support system, and most importantly, she has shown a commitment to her daughter's well-being." Lena held her breath. "Furthermore," the judge said, "I am troubled by the circumstances that brought Miss Cross to her current situation. Mr. Cross, you testified that you left your daughter at Mr. Hale's cabin as a way to teach her responsibility. But what you actually did was abandon a pregnant woman in dangerous conditions with no means of supporting herself. That is not teaching responsibility. That is child endangerment, if not outright abandonment." Lena's father's face reddened. "Therefore," the judge said, "I am denying the petition for custody. Grace will remain with her mother." The gavel came down. Lena burst into tears. Gideon pulled her into his arms, and she sobbed into his chest, relief and exhaustion pouring out of her. Across the courtroom, Lena's father stood abruptly. His face was red, his jaw tight. He said something sharp to his lawyer, then turned and stormed out without looking back. Rebecca gathered her papers, smiling. "We did it." "We did," Lena whispered, her voice thick with tears. "We really did." Outside the courthouse, the sun was shining. Sarah was waiting with Grace, who was wide awake and blinking in the bright light. Lena took her daughter and held her close, kissing her forehead over and over. "We won, baby," she whispered. "We won." Sarah hugged them both. "I told you you'd get through this. I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have, but I'm glad I could help." Gideon stood off to the side, watching. Rebecca walked over to him. "You did good in there," she said. "Thanks. So what's next for you?" He looked at Lena, who was laughing with Sarah, Grace bundled between them. "I don't know yet," he said. "You care about them." "Yeah." "Then stick around. They need you." "Maybe I need them too." Rebecca smiled. "Maybe you do." The weeks that followed were a blur of adjustment. Lena kept working at the diner, kept living with Sarah, kept building the life she'd fought so hard for. But something had shifted. The fear was gone. The constant looking over her shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It was gone. She was free. Gideon helped where he could. He fixed things around Sarah's house, a leaky faucet, a broken step, a window that wouldn't open. He watched Grace when Lena had shifts, bouncing the baby on his knee and singing old songs he'd half forgotten. And somewhere along the way, without either of them planning it, they became a family. One Saturday afternoon, about a month after the hearing, Lena asked Gideon to take a drive with her. Sarah volunteered to watch Grace, and they set off in his old truck with no particular destination in mind. They ended up at the cabin. Lena hadn't been back since she'd moved to town, and she stood in the clearing, looking at the place that had been her home for those desperate winter months. "It looks smaller than I remember," she said. "It is small, but it saved my life." "You saved your own life. The cabin was just wood and nails." She turned to face him. "No, you saved me. You in this place. You gave me somewhere to go when I had nothing. You'd have figured it out. Maybe. But I'm glad I didn't have to." They walked around the clearing, Spring had fully arrived. Wildflowers bloomed in patches where the snow had been. Birds sang in the trees. It was beautiful in a way Gideon had stopped noticing during his years alone. "What are you going to do with this place?" Lena asked. "I don't know. I've been thinking about selling it." "Don't." He looked at her, surprised. "Why not?" "Because it's part of our story, and I don't want to lose that." "You're not going to lose it. It's not going anywhere." "I know, but still, keep it for Grace. So one day we can bring her here and show her where it all started." Gideon thought about that. About Grace growing up, hearing the story of how her mother survived a Montana winter in a cabin with a broken stranger, about how that stranger became her family. "Okay," he said, "I'll keep it." They sat on the porch steps side by side, watching the sun move across the sky. "I've been thinking," Lena said after a while. "About what?" "About us." His heart skipped. "What about us?" "About what we are, what we're doing." "And what are we doing?" She turned to face him. "I don't know, but I know I don't want to stop." "Neither do I." "So what does that mean?" He took her hand. "It means we figure it out. Together." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Good, because I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them. Gideon felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been tight and knotted for 3 years. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," he said quietly. She looked up at him, smiling through tears. "Yeah?" "Yeah." "So what do we do about it?" "We see where it goes." "That's not much of a plan." "It's the only one I've got." She laughed. "I guess that'll have to be enough." They kissed then, soft and tentative, and when they pulled apart, they were both smiling. 6 months later, Gideon sold the cabin. Not because he wanted to forget it, but because he needed the money to buy a house in town. A real house, with electricity and running water and enough room for all of them. Lena finished her GED and started taking classes at the community college. She wanted to be a nurse, said she wanted to help people the way she'd been helped. Grace grew, learned to crawl, then walk, then talk. Her first word was "dada," which she said looking right at Gideon. Lena had laughed until she cried. They got married on a spring morning 2 years after the hearing. Nothing fancy, just the courthouse, Sarah as a witness, Grace in a little white dress. Gideon wore the same shirt he'd worn to court, and Lena wore a sundress she'd bought at a thrift store. It was perfect. Life wasn't easy. There were hard days, days when money was tight, and Grace was sick, and Lena was exhausted from working and studying. Days when Gideon woke up thinking about his son, about the failure that had driven him to the mountain in the first place. But there were good days too, days when Grace laughed so hard she couldn't breathe. Days when Lena came home with a good grade on a test and Gideon cooked dinner to celebrate. Days when they sat on the porch together, watching the sun go down, and realized they'd built something worth keeping. One evening, about 3 years after that first terrible day when Lena had been left in the snow, Gideon sat on the porch with Grace on his lap. She was 4 now, chattering nonstop about something that had happened at preschool. Lena came out and sat beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You look happy." "I am." "Good. You deserve it." "So do you." She smiled. "We both do." Grace wiggled off Gideon's lap and ran into the yard, chasing a butterfly. They watched her, this little person they'd fought so hard to protect. "You ever think about your son?" Lena asked quietly. "Every day." "Does it still hurt?" "Yeah, but it's different now. Less like drowning and more like, I don't know, like remembering something beautiful that's gone." "You think he'd be proud of you?" Gideon thought about that. About the man he'd been 3 years ago, broken and hiding, about the man he was now. "I hope so," he said. "I think he would be." Grace came running back, out of breath, holding a dandelion. "Look!" Lena took it from her. "It's beautiful, baby. Should we make a wish?" Grace nodded enthusiastically. Lena held the dandelion up. "Okay, close your eyes and wish for something good." Grace squeezed her eyes shut tight. Lena and Gideon exchanged a glance, both smiling. Then Grace blew, and the seeds scattered into the wind, carrying wishes into the world. Gideon watched them float away and thought about everything that had brought them here. The pain, the fear, the impossible choices and desperate gambles. And he realized something. He'd spent 3 years running from failure, 3 years convinced he didn't deserve a second chance. But here, with Lena beside him and Grace laughing in the yard and the sun setting over the mountains, he finally understood. Second chances weren't something you earned. They were something you built. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of refusing to give up at a time. And somehow, against all odds, they'd built one. Not perfect, not easy, but real. A year later, Lena graduated from nursing school. Gideon and Grace sat in the audience, clapping louder than anyone else when her name was called. She walked across the stage with tears streaming down her face, and when she held up her diploma, she looked right at them. That night, they celebrated at home. Sarah came over with a cake. A few people from the diner showed up. Even Rebecca stopped by, bringing a bottle of champagne that Gideon couldn't pronounce. It was loud and chaotic and wonderful. After everyone left, Gideon found Lena on the back porch, looking up at the stars. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" "About how far we've come." He sat beside her. "Pretty far. Remember when we met, when my dad dumped me in the snow and drove away?" "Yeah." "Did you ever think we'd end up here?" "No?" "Me neither." She turned to face him. "I'm glad we did, though." "So am I." She took his hand. "I love you, Gideon Hale." "I love you too." They sat there in the quiet, hands clasped, watching the stars wheel overhead. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, Gideon wasn't haunted by what he'd lost. He was grateful for what he'd found. Inside, Grace called out for a glass of water. They both stood, smiling at each other, and went in together. A family. Imperfect, hard-won, real. And that was more than enough. That was everything.